Hey guys, welcome to Hughes History. I think it's about time that we did Donald Trump's travel ban. It's a Muslim ban. No, it's a travel ban. I think it's probably about time we all defined it, put it in historical context, and then develop our own rational opinions. So why don't we go giddy up for the learning and go see if we can't get her done right now. So let's talk about it. And of course, I'm talking about Executive Order 13,769, protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States. And of course, we're presuming that you have a little prior knowledge of executive actions and specifically executive orders. And if you don't, you probably should watch that video. We just made it. But nevertheless, the main idea is executive orders must be constitutional, and they also must be executing existing congressional law. So let's go over the Trump travel ban. It's a Muslim ban. It's a travel ban. And then we'll talk a little bit about the history and the arguments for and against the travel ban. It's a Muslim ban. It's a travel ban. So there's a few sections of this executive order. Primary ones would be the first one, which is the rationale. And the Trump administration wrote this heavily depending on 9/11 as kind of the rationale behind why we have to do this. And then there's a couple key sections after that. And the first one would be basically a halt for 90 days of all nationals traveling to the United States from 7 predominantly Muslim nations. This would be the Sudan and Somalia and Syria, Libya and Yemen, Iran, and Iraq. So if you are a national from one of those 7 countries, even if you have a visa, then you're not going to be allowed entry for 90 days. Now, it was a little bit up in the air in terms of green card holders. These are people that have permanent residence in the United States, but later it was deemed by the Homeland Security Department that they weren't going to go after green card holders. So it's supposed to be for 90 days. That's to give Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, and the National Director of Intelligence 30 days to kind of contact countries that have people coming into the United States to determine whether or not more information is needed because we're questioning their vetting procedures. And then those countries would be notified, giving them 60 days to kind of respond. And then the Homeland Security Director would compile a list, maybe in addition to the countries on the list, to the president for further consideration. But basically, it's a freeze everything so we can figure things out kind of argument. And then it goes on to talk about the United States refugee program. We last year admitted 110,000 refugees. So first we're going to cut that to 50,000 and we're going to suspend the program for 120 days so we can examine kind of how we're vetting refugees. So then after the 120 days, those countries on that list will be reevaluated, determining refugee status, but Syria will be suspended indefinitely. And then after that, it further goes on to say preference would be given to religious minorities. And that's kind of up in the question of whether that was just meaning Christians or any religious minority that might include Muslim religious minorities as well. So that's basically it. We're not going to talk too much about the hoopla that occurred afterwards. Of course, there's protests and there's lawsuits. Right now, the program is on hold as a federal court looks at it, and eventually it's going to make its way probably to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not President Trump was operating within his constitutional rights to do this. So that's the executive order. We have a ban on nationals from those 7 countries for 90 days as we think about things, and a total ban on refugees for 120 days as we reevaluate, an indefinite ban on Syrian refugees. So let's talk about the good stuff, which is why people think this is a great idea and why some people think that it's the pits. So if you're for the travel ban, number one, you believe that the president is operating in the best interest of the nation and national security. Now, of course, he has to follow immigration law, so the people that support this are heavily dependent on the 1952 immigration law, which has a certain section, which I'm going to read to you right now. Whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interest of the United States, he may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. So that's pretty clear-cut language, and people that are proponents of this say the president is within his discretion to do this. And proponents are quick to point out that presidents have already exercised this type of power. In fact, the previous 6 presidents have used kind of that clause from the 1952 Immigration Act to suspend some type of people coming into the United States. So they say Obama temporarily froze the refugee program from Iraq as they tried to determine what was going on, because there was some problems with people here from Iraq sending weapons to al-Qaeda, but that also he used this 4 or 5 times to specifically target groups from entry into the United States. This mainly had to do with people that were engaged in cybersecurity against democracy and people that were basically violating human rights. And that's the same situation for George W. Bush, who did the same sort of thing for people that were involved in human abuse rights in Zimbabwe. Clinton did it with the same kind of human rights violators in the Bosnia-Serbia conflict. And then actually George Bush Sr. did it for another reason. There was a crisis in Haiti, and they were sending refugees in boats out into the water towards the United States. We rounded them all up, put them on Guantanamo Bay in processing centers, and President Bush kind of citing that 1952 clause to send those refugees back. Ronald Reagan had some experience with this as well in terms of anti-communist restrictions and people coming into the United States from Cuba and Nicaragua, the Sandinistas. Now, the biggest example before Donald Trump is actually Jimmy Carter, who suspended entry into the United States, the country of Iran. Of course, this was during the Iranian hostage crisis, and there was exceptions for people that were opposed to the regime, and that was temporary as well. But they'll point out that, number one, this is not a Muslim ban. They say that over and over. This is targeting people from specific nations that pose a threat to the United States, and specifically because their vetting procedures were deemed to be insufficient. And they point to the fact that President Obama had these 7 countries on a list that determined the very same thing, warning American citizens about traveling to those countries, but he didn't suspend the entry of nationals from those countries coming into the United States. And again, they point to the idea that this is within the constitutional rights of the president to protect the national security, that he's doing his job and that the court shouldn't get in the way of that, and that he's also following congressional law. He's keeping America safe. So that's the basic argument for it. Now let's talk a little bit about the arguments against it. So there's a few arguments against it. People that oppose this ban, number one, say that it's a Muslim ban, that President Donald Trump numerous times during the campaign said he wanted a Muslim ban, and they see this as the first step to that. Now, they're quick to point out, people who support Donald Trump, that there are countries that are Muslim majority not on this list: Indonesia, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia. But of course, people that oppose the ban will point back to that and say if the intention is to keep us safe, if 9/11 is being used as a reason, then why is Saudi Arabia not on that list? Why is Egypt not on that list, which is a hotbed for terrorism? And there are people that question Donald Trump, even pointing out that we don't know if there are financial connections between those countries and Donald Trump. People also say that this violates congressional law. Now, they'll nod to 1952 and say certainly that is true, but there's a law after 1952 called the 1965 Immigration Act, which specifically bans anybody from using discrimination to stop people from entering the United States based on gender, based on creed, based on place of origin. And they say that this clearly does that. They further go on to counter the argument that it's within the president's discretion to say that not everything is within the president's discretion, that the Constitution has bounds and the judicial branch is allowed to exercise that in our system of checks and balances, that President Trump has basically gone too far, he's banned too many people, and that it's just unconstitutional. It's an abuse of the executive power. They'll go on to say they also oppose it because they believe it's just bad policy, that it's not going to keep us safe. They point to the fact that there were no people, refugees or nationals from those 7 countries that have actually attacked the United States domestically. So on its face, this doesn't really carry water because it is not rational in the sense that it's actually attacking the problem. Not to mention, they say that it's going to help recruitment for terrorist organizations, and it's also going to lower America's respect around the world and basically cause chaos and problems. Opponents of the ban also point out to the lengthy process that refugees already go through, sometimes taking up to 2 years to enter the United States. Now, of course, there's lawsuits, like I've mentioned, that are already in full force, and eventually it'll be up to that Supreme Court to determine whether or not this ban stays. So there you go. Lots of information about Donald Trump's travel ban. It's a Muslim ban. It's a travel ban. It's up to you to leave it in the comments below whether or not you think this ban is constitutional, and we want to hear what you think. And make sure that if you haven't, you subscribe to Hughes History, because I've asked you like 1,000 times, and it's probably, time that you listen. And the other thing I'd like to say is the thing I say all the time. Where attention goes, energy flows, and we'll see you guys next time that you press my buttons.